This story happened to a young woman named Claire Donovan. When she turned 25, she received a letter from a notary. At first, Claire thought it was a mistake. It was an official will which stated, "You are entitled to an apartment in New York City." Claire had never heard of the owner, a certain Evelyn Rose, who was named as her great-aunt. The letter stated that Claire had inherited an apartment in New York. Claire's parents were no longer alive, and there was no one to ask who this woman was. Claire's curiosity overcame all the doubt she had in her head. On the appointed day, she arrived in an old neighborhood of New York, where brick houses with cast-iron staircases resembled the 19th century. The house mentioned in the letter towered over the street like a piece of another era. Gothic arches, old stained-glass windows. The house stood alone among trendy cafes and galleries. The apartment occupied an entire floor, high ceilings, a long corridor, 5 rooms, and in the center of the apartment was a round living room with a huge stained-glass window. The notary handed over the keys and said, "This is a house with history. Take care of it." In the evening, Claire, tired after the move, unpacked her suitcases. The apartment seemed lifeless until at exactly 12:13 a.m. a soft chime sounded. The antique clock came to life on its own, even though the girl had not wound it. 2 hours later, Claire woke up with the feeling that someone was in the room. The silence was too thick, as if the walls were listening. A creaking sound came from the living room, as if someone had run their fingers across the stained glass window. The next day, Claire went to the antique shop on the corner. She wanted to find out everything she could about the apartment she had inherited. The owner of the antique shop, an elderly Mrs. Goodman, frowned when she heard the address. The Rose House? They say there are shadows there. In the late 1890s, Evelyn Rose held private seances in that apartment. Several guests disappeared without a trace. After her death, the apartment stood empty for years. Those who dared to live there did not stay long. Claire smiled nervously, but the words stuck in her memory. When she returned, she decided to examine the apartment more closely. In the bedroom, behind a double-wall panel, she found a hiding place, an old leather-bound diary. "They come at midnight. To hear them, you have to open the door of the inner circle. However, the key is missing," read the entry for 1901. In the hiding place lay a copper key decorated with an engraved symbol of wings. At midnight, Claire, yielding to a strange impulse, went into the living room. The clock again showed 12:13 a.m. The stained glass window glowed with an unnatural light. When she touched the glass with her finger, it responded with a deep hum. A thin beam of light from the glass pointed to a small hole in the floor. The key seemed to slide into the barely noticeable hole in the floor that the beam of light was pointing to. The wall behind the fireplace quietly slid away, revealing a dark, narrow passageway. The passageway led to a round room without windows. A circle with darkened symbols was drawn on the floor. The air in this room smelled of old wax. In the center stood a low table, in the center of which stood a copper candlestick. Next to it lay a photograph of a young woman in black. It was Evelyn Rose herself. Suddenly, Claire heard a sigh behind her. Turning around, she saw a silhouette in the corner with eyes that flickered, alive, sad. A voice sounded simultaneously in her head and in the room. "Return the power to the circle. Without it, we cannot leave. Claire feverishly read the diary. It turned out that Evelyn Rose had been trying to retain the souls of deceased guests in order to grant them eternal life. The ritual was interrupted when the chief medium disappeared and the circle remained unfinished. The last entry read, "Whoever enters after me will complete what has been started. Thus, balance will be restored." On the third day, strange things began to happen. As soon as Claire closed her eyes, she saw streets from a century ago, horse-drawn carriages, gas lamps, women in long dresses. Sometimes the visions continued even with her eyes open, as if 2 times were overlapping. At night, the faces of people she didn't know appeared in the mirrors. Some were crying, others were screaming silently. The clock invariably showed 12:13 a.m. On the 4th night, Claire made up her mind. She would take the key and go to the secret room. When the clock struck the fateful hour, the lights in the apartment went out. Only the moonlight reflecting off the stained glass showed her the way. A blue flame flared up in the room. Silhouettes began to appear inside, dozens of figures. Evelyn stood out among them. "Complete the ritual," she whispered. The diary said, "To free them, you must read the names of the departed." Claire repeated the words, barely legible in the old handwriting. Each name echoed hollowly in the air. With each new name, the figures became more transparent, and they began to dissolve into thin air. Suddenly, one of the shadows stepped toward her. It was a young girl with long blonde hair. "You are the last one. We have been waiting for you," she whispered. A strong gust of wind tore off the stained glass window, and moonlight flooded into the room, mixing the past and the present. There was a deafening ringing sound, and all the figures disappeared. Claire woke up on the floor. The secret room no longer existed, only a smooth brick wall. The stained glass window in the living room was intact, but now there was a new fragment on it. A woman with open eyes, strikingly similar to Claire herself. Neighbors later said that there had been a strange bright glow over the house that night. The apartment has changed since then. The former oppressive darkness is gone, but the clock still sometimes freezes at 12:13 a.m., as if to remind us that the connection between times has not been broken.